start off by saying, hey, we're back with one more episode of Speciale Talks. It's been a while since we caught up. Speciale Talks is a series of conversations with operators, entrepreneurs, experts building technology, solutions and platforms. And as part of Speciale, we invest in early stage deep technology solutions, right? In enterprise software, SaaS, deep technology, hardware, etc. We are partners with many such founders who are building amazing solutions, right? As part of this series, today we're talking about something very, very current, right? Not many conversations can happen today without the mention of GenAI or data around it. So we're definitely excited about today's conversation of how GenAI and data interplay today in today's world, correct? And for today's conversation, we're very happy to welcome Akash Tandon and Satya, two founders building amazing companies, right? Full disclaimer, both of them in our portfolio that we are doubly excited about, right? Quick 2 minutes about Akash. Akash has been a data infrastructure guy and building products for companies like Social Corps, Atlan. He's also written a book on data intelligence, business intelligence using in Python, etc. So he will have a lot of insights on that. He's currently co-founder at Loop Panel, that is trying to make the life of user researchers much easier with a bunch of AI and associated techniques. So we'll get to hear from him as well. Akash, thanks for joining us and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Arjun. Always a pleasure.
Right. Our other speaker is Satya, who's been a serial entrepreneur, right? Is on to his third startup, I think, right now, right? And he's built and sold a startup in the data infrastructure space to Apple, no less, right? So there are some learnings there, and his long and illustrious career in data infrastructure. He's once again building a strong platform called Blue Copa, right? At the heart of it is unique data infrastructure solutions, this time for applications in the financial domain for finance teams and strategic finance teams in companies, right? So his experiences from the past and how this entire landscape has evolved will be very, very valuable. Satya, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Arjun. Hey, Akash.
Right, so I'll hand over to both of you for a little background of your view on how this whole data landscape leading up to how data feeds into generative AI, how you define it at a very basic level, right? And just set that context based on your own experiences, correct, of how these two things have evolved and how they've come together now today. And that sort of will be a good base to get started with. So if each of you can give your viewpoint on that, we'll start with that. Sure. Akash, we go with you.
Okay. Sure. So to start off, I'll just quickly add that I had started off with the whole AI sort of domain back in 2012, which was a very exciting time because that was around the time when the whole deep learning revolution began. And then a few years on, got sucked into the data ecosystem, partially fascinated by the fact that even back then, doing like small-scale machine learning by today's standards was a big hassle because cleaning data in spreadsheets wasn't any fun, right? Same as what people are trying to do with much larger data sets today. So, but one thing that I've realized over the whole course in the last, almost a decade at this point at different sort of levels of understanding is that there's always been this divide between people trying to necessarily extract value from data and the whole data ecosystem and the whole data stack that got built. And right now, the whole AI revolution kind of happened in parallel, which necessarily wasn't ideal, but just the people who were always interested in those two problems were different for different reasons. And a lot of times, this, among other reasons, was one of the reasons why a lot of AI and data initiatives. It was a long-running gag that most data initiatives always fail. But recently, what has happened, and I think this is becoming more important, especially because I think people realize now that to really build great data science or AI solutions, you need to have your basics around data hygiene and data sanity in place. So I think increasingly people have realized that just the value of having good sort of data infrastructure in place, and especially that with the whole LLM and GenAI and the whole open source or closed source APIs, whatever you use for leveraging GenAI these days, people are increasingly realizing that the more you are apt with your data, the more you have your data systems in place, the more sort of hygiene you have in place when it comes to your data systems, the better it is. So increasingly, these two worlds are kind of converging. At least they're acknowledging each other a lot more than they did, over the last few years. Now, I mean, that's a high level sort of understanding that I have right now. Obviously, we can dive deeper into the nitty-gritties, but
No, sure, very helpful with that context. Satya, your views on what has evolved, what you've seen, and what is this whole convergence that Akash is talking about. Do you see the same? How do you see it?
Right. So even like I'll talk in even more broader strokes than Akash did, right? So why have we arrived at the place we have arrived now? What has led to us getting here is primarily the ability for large companies like Google. They've kind of discovered / hacked their way into handling large amounts of data. That's become necessary as a part of their business model, right? That's one part. Then simultaneously, somebody thought that neural networks, which I think they're from 60s or 70s, right? Those could have another a fresh breath of life with the large amounts of data that you have. And again, because of the large amount of data that Google or all the larger companies had to deal with, and the fact that cloud came in, and we had the infrastructure now and the compute infrastructure to deal with it, right? That adds into the fact that now we are able to make big neural networks, right? And then the combination of big neural networks added with this data handling together is now is the reason where we are why today, right? Is because 2 or 3 things came together, and that is why this new LLM, this new generative AI paradigm has come through, right? It's not it could not have come any earlier, right? It came when it could come, right? Because everything came together at just the right time.
No, that's a very interesting way to articulate that and design that. I think large data came first,
Great.
maybe, possibly, right? Because of internet,
Business
mobile,
models
etc.
came first, yeah.
Right? And then you needed
Compute,
compute,
right?
right?
Right.
Right. So that followed, right? The neural networks were there as a concept and were being used, but without these two things, right, fed to the neural network, large data sets and compute available, you couldn't come up with today's GenAI capabilities. Very interesting way of.
Because the classical learning, it didn't actually require, so to say, big data or large amounts of data, right? You could learn things in the classical way with maybe 100,000 records to top it to understand the patterns. Right?
And therefore, you didn't need compute either. You could
Correct.
do with CPUs and you didn't need GPUs.
Correct. So that's the reason why LLM came now, not before.
Very
I
interesting.
think that is a good point. I think one of the things that was discovered, which I think led to this, and which for a long time was a bone of contention, is the community was the whole point around whether it's compute that's important or the algorithms. And then at some point, someone tried to push it. We know the company which did. And they basically discovered that scaling laws are a thing. And I think that's a very good point. That's that there is. So the whole sort of revolution at sort of scale and data kind of at its backbone. So it makes sense. It's very good.
So it's not the chicken or the egg. We clearly know it's the data which came first and everything else followed, right? So
yeah, that's very helpful. That's very helpful. So then in this new world, right, where large models are being trained with really large data sets, right, with infrastructure, how should we think about, I think Akash touched upon this, data hygiene, data quality, pipelines. Just talk about, therefore, readiness, right? These infrastructure platforms also have come into place in the last few years, like you said, because data explosion has happened, right? We've all seen the amazing force of companies such as Snowflake and many others, what they have enabled, of course, in conjunction with cloud, right? But what are, according to you, the biggest challenges in handling data today?
you
Either of you? Yeah.
first.
Satya, you can go first this time.
Okay. What are the big challenges? So again, I'd like to set some more context. Expect this from me. Because I
Perfect.
do the context setting first. So what is that generative AI, or what are we looking at? And if we understand that first, then we would be able to understand what challenges we are going to face potentially, right? If we look at in broad strokes, the major, if you will, Turing Award uh, level papers, right, are the Transformers thing, the attention is all you need paper, right? And then, separately the alpha model stuff, right? Which is, which involves self-play to gather more data and to understand and then, improve on the play, right? So broadly, when people speak about artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence, so to say, they talk about two things. One is agency, right? Which is the thing has a task and it knows how to achieve the task. It has policies, so to say, right? And then what they call as the compression of knowledge, if you will, right? Now, the better way to understand it is look at a kid, right? As she grows up, and what is she learning? What is the data which is being fed? And how does it approximate to what uh, what artificial intelligence can do for us, right? Uh, we all know that these LLMs today, right? They are being graded on several tests, SATs, GMATs, etc. So why is it that they are doing that? How does that reflect? And what is that? How does that reflect intelligence in the first place, right? It's like it's just as if you would. How would you understand whether you want to take a person in your company, right, or into your organization or into your educational institution for more specialized knowledge? First, you would want them to do well on knowledge, aptitude, etc. Certain levels of stuff, and that is why these large language models are actually being graded on those tests. Right? Now, what is the data that was fed to these large language models today? If you see, it is similar to what humans have been fed, which is that babies hear their parents talk, and people outside talk. They make pattern matching machines inside their head, small pattern matching machines, and they start understanding language, right? And slowly, they get world experience, which is in terms of sensors, etc. Right? They continuously all data, visual, oral, everything is going in, right? And they start gathering knowledge. I think one of the first things. I've my kid is 7 years old, so I have a fairly recent experience of teaching my kid. So when a kid, one of the first things you show is like you show him a blackboard and say it's blackboard. Show him a tree, it's a tree, right? And so on and so forth. So they acquire knowledge with language, right? Vocabulary is a very critical part of gathering knowledge, because that compounds over a period of time, right? So what we are doing first is we are feeding data into an LLM, which is just generally language, labeled stuff, which teaches it concepts, right? And just like a human is able to read a book and compress the knowledge, right, and summarize it, the LLM, the artificial neural network, is actually able to summarize it. So Ilya Sutskever, right, who's one of the founders of OpenAI, he thinks that basically what a neural network is doing is compressing the large amount of data to something that is usable. And what do we mean by usable? That's where the second part of the data which comes in, which is what they call as reinforcement learning, right? In the particular case of OpenAI, it was reinforcement learning with human feedback. Like a kid, if after a little while you ask them about a concept they don't know, they start making up things, right? Which is very similar to the way these LLMs hallucinate. They start making up things, right? And when do they stop making up things? When they know more, or when there is a pushback from the outside world saying that they're not allowed to make up things, right? So this is another kind of data which is fed, which is a meta knowledge about what does a society, or what do a society of humans think about how you display or how you present your knowledge. So that's the second level of data. Now, after this is a third level where you have a generalist knowledgeable agent, so to say, right? And what do we do with these generalist knowledge agents in the real world? Like if you take a person, if after they've done their 10th or 12th, where they've got this generalist knowledge, they then teach them specifically about, let's say, medicine or law, or any specialized area in particular, right? And specialist areas need data, but in a summary form, is what I would like to argue, right? But that's why I'm setting this context, that the third level is where we are. I mean, because at the lower level, the foundational, we are assuming that the foundational models are going to be there. That's not our job. That is, some large companies who are doing it, or the open source which is going to do it, and get us to a stage where the foundational models are going to be available. And on top of it, we are going to build specialist systems, right? And that is where we need this data. And what kind of data is that? And is the thing that we can talk about further. Sorry, I've taken too much time, I think.
No, very helpful context as always, and I will pick up on that for Akash to kind of, either, my question there was, therefore, what is the nature of data needed for the training, for the preparation, what criteria has to be there. I think Satya also mentioned the labeling aspect. So obviously, it is one of the aspects that data preparation is in the steps of data preparation, right? So if you can throw light on some or all of those, and or add on certain things that Satya was saying, that'll be great.
Sure. Yeah. So Satya, I think, very nicely described the whole process that, let's say, one of the big companies who have sort of millions of dollars to spend can do to spin up their own sort of foundation models, as he pointed out, and which other companies will work on. So now I'll try to build upon what he already said. So, I mean, it goes out to the classic sort of problems that we all have sort of while running companies. How much do we do in-house? How much sort of we outsource? What do we build versus buy? So a lot. So we will most probably at this point, as it seems, is which is a sentiment that's echoed by I think a lot of people in the AI ecosystem more deeply embedded, is that there will not be a one sort of model to rule it all, but there will be sort of a lot of specialized models in place, uh, and which means a lot of companies I think will broadly face two problems and challenges, and then we can sort of go deeper if you want. One obviously will be the part around infrastructure and sort of their own data. So yes, you'll have open source models available, you'll have APIs available, uh, but then again, either they can be very expensive, or at times they can be they may not cater to your particular use case very well, right? So in those cases, you either have the option to, do as much as you can from scratch, or sort of train your own model, or you can try to fine tune sort of off the shelf model, or you can go out and try to sort of do a lot of things which right now a lot of teams are doing, which is be smart about using the models that are already there and try to find a balance between sort of the optimal result and sort of cost and sort of convenience. So there'll be two problems, as I said there. One will be just, I think, and I sort of used to say this a lot even when I was purely in the data infrastructure ecosystem working there. I think a lot of projects fail because of talent. I think that's still a big problem. Understanding sort of, what you need to do. Because yes, you can do a lot of things, but when to do, what to do, I think that is a bit fuzzy compared to even typical engineering or product problems. So there, a lot of understanding will need to be bred in with what all can be done with these new class of models and what you can do. And I think the more that is a bit tactical and more like a human resource problem, and the more I think, what can I say? The more implementation oriented problems that around will be around, deciding, let's go with the point. Like you said, you decided, okay, none of the models work. Now what do I do? So you can either say that I train a model, or you can say I will pick up a model and try to sort of make it as good as I can. And in that case, the next question will be, okay, so let's say if you have the person to do it, is the data that you have enough? Can you even use the data? Like, are you sort of under legal obligation to not use the data? And I know this particularly because these kind of questions I've been hearing for the last 5 years, right? So there'll be, and again, so infrastructure around sort of inputting that data, a lot of old data engineering problems, which I think, existed around sort of working with old school analytics or even models, a lot of them still exist, just wrapped up in a new flavor, because you still need your data around sort of, how the data is sort of formatted, how the data can be segmented, what data you can use versus not use. All that will still need to be sort of sorted as you use this new class of models, even if you get past the talent problem, which I do think is a big issue. So,
interesting. So you're basically, and help me or correct me if I'm wrong, you're basically saying this is not the magic pill yet, right? For that, a lot of people think it can be for so many companies who are looking to sort of really use AI for business benefit, correct? And what you are saying is the large publicly available models, correct? Either paid for like OpenAI or open source free, as the case might be, are still not contextual enough for, let's say, my small business, my medium business, my enterprise. So therefore, it's not directly relevant, useful immediately. It'll give you some answers, but it'll not really answer most of it. Is that the direction? Is that a fair summary of what you said?
Yeah, I think the shine will wear off. That's what I think. So even, for example, yesterday, or I think a couple of weeks back, Snowflake and Databricks, the two big companies in the data ecosystem, had their conferences, and they both released some version of their own models or sort of unstructured query engines and things like that.
Yeah, and
I
one of them, of
think,
course, acquired,
yeah. So
Mosaic with, with those model capabilities, I guess.
yes. So I think increasingly UX and proprietary sort of this data will become more important, and data not just in the sense that you will train using it, but even a lot of, I think, what people are doing, even like designing their own prompts or pipelines, or a lot of that will rely on internal sort of knowledge and IP, especially as you move away from general use cases, especially niche use cases. I think there'll be a second wave. Right
So
now, it's
companies will need to start thinking about how their own proprietary data is being set up, available, accessible, to therefore hopefully build specialized company level models. Would that be the best way of extracting value out of this whole wave?
is that a question for me?
Yeah, Akash, you only
Okay.
first, and then Satya also, if he has an answer to this. Basically, specialized models. What we are saying is a large existing models not easily accessible, or accessible but not directly add value.
Yeah,
Then the option is specialized models.
I'm saying not necessarily specialized model as much as even if it's a layer that you build on top of it, which sort of works with the same model. I'm saying it will take more than just plugging in an external model to make it work. It may not be a new model, it may be a new layer that you build on top of it, some smart data processing, something like that.
Got it. Satya, any thoughts on this part, the specialized model versus the generic model out there, and how you see this playing out? And
Yeah. So one thing that I find very helpful each time I try to understand or try and answer a question is to look at these foundational models as sort of talent. One of the things that Akash was mentioning was, most projects fail because of lack of talent, right? So I would look at it as, let's say, fresh talent, right? So out of the box, like out of school, right? That's why they are doing GMAT. So it's fresh talent. Now, there are 2, 3 levels at which these specialized models can operate, right? Just continuing with the analogy, a person comes into your organization, she is taught about the processes of the organization, and she's given a particular work to do, prompt to do, right? And because she has agency, and because now she needs what they call as knowledge or grounding, right? Which is, she might read books which are specific to, let's say, if it is supply chain management, right? She might read books which are specific to supply chain management, or she might have read that in business school, right? So now that is one level of specialization that might be available with the foundational model or not, right? That depends, right? And secondly,
yeah, the foundation model might start adding, hey, a finance layer, a retail layer, I don't know, I don't know, a big deal, something, right? An engineering layer, so on and so forth.
right. So this second level, if you just continue with the analogy, is your business secrets.
Company level, maybe?
Company level, right? Company level stuff, which is your own way, your own specialized knowledge. So whatever they call as proprietary is typically, you can equate it to business secret.
Sure.
Real IP. So that's where the data is very important, or the IP is very important. It is almost at a IP level stuff, right? That you give exposure to this model. Right? How do you do that? The multiple ways. At the moment, we are doing it using a vector database, and taking that and feeding it into a prompt and giving it to a LLM. Right now, what is the hygiene required for all of this? It's not very different from any of the classical machine learning stuff that we did, right? Which is like, you need data hygiene at a very bare minimum. You need to present it. So if a human can understand it, so can an LLM, right? You put a table with facts and say that when this happens, this is the domain, this is the codomain, this is the input and output. So just as a human can see it and process it, the LLM can see it and process it.
Sure.
Right? With a generalist, as much as a generalist can understand your business secret and what is
sure. If you put it out there, like that, this is the strategy of this company. This is the tactic of this company. This is the philosophy of this company. This is the approach of this company, so on and so forth.
So all of those, like Akash pointed out, can be built as layers. They can be built as policy layers. They can be built as strategy layers. They can be built as vector databases, which ground the model in using further knowledge, etc. So all of these can be built as layers.
Those are not necessarily compute intensive, data intensive, or they can be. How do you?
No, I don't personally feel they are very compute intensive, right? If you do want, like, if you see OpenAI recently, they've said that, okay, GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT 4, they're going to allow fine tuning going forward. And which means that there is a queue there, which means that there are certain aspects of knowledge which might require fine tuning, which will be compute intensive. That is more important for people who have collected a large amount of data. I think that is where those use cases are coming from. Right? They might not be relevant for a company which is doing some manufacturing of, let's say, even rockets. Right?
Yeah, they're a little more horizontal in some sense, right? And those massive sets of data enable more horizontal learning or more generic learning, which then can be dissipated largely seemingly as APIs or as utilities through which you make, small dollars per transaction, but you make billions of transactions.
So it's equivalent to the Bloomberg GPT thing that we were talking about, that Bloomberg released, right? Which is it just fed it a lot of amount of news and stock market data, and how a human would interpret that, and that's kind of fine tuning the generalist data, the generalist model to what. So all the Bloomberg started with doing their own transformer, if I'm not wrong, but I think those are the use cases for which OpenAI is trying to allow fine tuning of GPT-4. Their agenda, their strategy is also changing. Their tactics are also changing as the world is evolving. This is a very nascent field for sure, right? But what we are trying to understand is how is the landscape going to be ahead, right? And at least for 3-4 years, what is your readiness as a business, and what should you think about it, right? That is what we are discussing.
Right? Interesting.
As I see it, there is definitely going to be a replacement of some talent, right? Like Ash, hit the nail on the head when he said that most projects fail because of lack of talent. There's decent talent is what that will get replaced by AI in the immediate future. In the immediate future, immediate being like on a 5-year horizon.
But not very specialized talent.
Not very specialized. Need not be very specialized.
Some generic talent will have that. Yeah. Got it. Maybe just to pick up on a little thing that you said, and we spoke about, the large models built by the Bloombergs of the world, of course, and the fundamental models, of course, built by OpenAI. Facebook has something open source, Google has, right? Any thoughts on just these big boys? Can there be any other big boys? Is there opportunity for any outsiders to come into this play, or has that ship sailed? We're just prognosticating here, but it seems like so many, particularly from our industry, right, which is billions of dollars are being pumped into these opportunities and these ideas, right? Has that big ship sailed on the LLM, large LLMs, correct? Is that going to be just around these half a dozen players, right? And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. You guys are in the trenches, use these things, know people in these places, and have been thinking about this forever. Right? Correct? Is that done? Can there be any break in this? Is there, can still small companies still aspire to create some meaningful dent on this large, what I crudely call it, that's a utility now, or that should become a utility, just like AWS infrastructure, Azure infrastructure, Google Cloud, so on and so forth, right? But what's your view on this? Correct, because that seems like the data moat, that they have crawled the internet or their own data sources, whatever. That seems like data moat. So I'm going towards the data as a moat
Yep. Right.
question, but maybe with this hook. So curious to know your thoughts here.
So for foundational models, definitely you need large amounts of data, but you need large amounts of curated data, right? So these curated data sets, there are now open source data sets, as well as companies have built their own data sets. There is OpenAI, I believe, has a lot of people, a lot of contractors who curate this data for them, right? There are companies which are around curating data. The companies built around that, right? That is one area where you might want to focus on. It might be geography specific, segment specific, or whatever. Those particular data, and as we discussed, right, data sets around medicine, data sets around molecules, pharma, whatever it is, right?
Big industries, big domains that
Big
have
domain.
depth, and that might, each industry and domain might have large data requirements. And if somebody can sort of ring fence that and capture that and build around that, that might still be moats.
Correct. Correct.
Which probably the big boys are still doing. So there is an opportunity.
Correct.
They have not yet already done it.
Right. So the way I see this evolving is there will be open source models which are much more generic, let's say 10th class, right? Then somebody takes it and makes it pass some other exam, right? So that's how I'm looking at it, right? So there is also, the other thing is, there is this graph of, so there are techniques like LoRa, QLoRa, quantization, everything that is happening in the LLM space itself, which is making the models come down in size in terms of compute requirements. So that is one graph which is happening. Simultaneously, what is happening is the cost of these GPUs, this specialized hardware for training, that is also going to come up, right?
Correct.
That is also going to drop, right?
Correct.
At which point, all these billions of dollars which are going in now may.
Yeah, they were just for a first mover advantage.
Right. So that's a first mover advantage, but is it like seriously a first mover advantage? There is no. The two ways to think about it, right? OpenAI has lots of users. What is it doing with that human feedback?
Correct. And that is that critical enough for the lead for the long haul.
If you take Anthropic, if you take Pi.ai, these are the guys, new boys in the town, right? Newer boys in the town, right? So they are believing in reinforcement learning without human feedback. That's the natural reinforcement. See, reinforcement learning is the game, is a final game, right? Human feedback happens to be just the appetizer. Right? So I mean, you should be able to, just using data, you could incorporate the human feedback in the data itself. That's a very crude, high level way of putting it. And that's, yeah, basically there is scope for newer guys because of these cost dynamics, working differently.
Interesting. Right? Akash?
Yeah, I think I'll add one thing to it. So one way to think about it obviously is, okay, can you sort of top these guys, make better foundational models? But I think, especially for someone like OpenAI, and I think Anthropic, or even the way someone like Stability works on this, which is the folks behind Stable Diffusion, they are kind of research first in some sense, and then they have this whole sort of enterprise or customer layer. And which is where I think even the Google paper, which Transformers, which Satya said, sort of stemmed for. So there'll always be research happening. And as long as sort of there's active research happening, I think there's an opportunity here for someone to come in, because yes, like the cost, there's a barrier, which is right now one big barrier happened around sort of the cost it takes But as like, for example, let's say tomorrow, one thing which I know for a fact, couple of sort of interesting directions that this space is taking is one around agents and stuff, which basically goes even one step beyond sort of LLMs and or even generative AI, which is basically saying that, hey, can you have agents which drives things? And like no one really sort of knows if that will work right now, but
Just for context for the audience also, what are agents? Yeah,
okay,
how do you define agents? What do they do in addition to this? How do they build on this?
sure.
Elaborate.
So agents, and the other thing, by the way, just I was going towards modality, which is right now basically people are also trying to get to models which work across multiple domains, which even OpenAI is also trying to work in. Which is probably the most straightforward of the two to sort of think about. But agents is something, and this is something that is being talked about because of two reasons. One, there were some open source projects which really took off, and there's been a lot of interest in that. But agents generally is the concept that these LLMs can be made to sort of, you can stitch them together in a way and sort of have them work with external systems in a way that they can not just be one-off sort of systems that you interact with, but they become kind of, basically they truly become AI in the sense that you give them a task and they figure things out, which hasn't gotten to the point that, I mean, production, but from a couple of people and sort of being and sort of generally sort of from one contact who works at OpenAI, I heard like this is something that's been seriously sort of thought about. So which also their latest release, a lot of it was around working with APIs, which partially sort of stems from the interest in this aspect. So there'll always be, I think, as long as there's new research coming out, someone needs to sort of get it to users. And I don't think a lot of these companies who are doing it will necessarily have the bandwidth or even the intent to take them. I don't know if Microsoft feels differently, but there'll always be, I think, an opportunity, maybe just not the exact one which maybe OpenAI cracked or Anthropic is trying to go after.
Yeah, I think the way things are changing and how it is also being consumed by both customers, users directly, and by B2B enterprises, that will therefore shape the narrative of where are the bigger opportunities. But that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. That there will be newer opportunities emerge at different layers, right? I think the agent part for actionability makes sense.
I kind of believe that agents are going to be built by the SaaS companies, right? The SaaS companies, see, today SaaS
You're
companies,
just looking at them as last mile applications.
correct, they are the last mile stuff, and it's like they are a direct replacement to either a person or a department in your organization. So agents, will group together with a problem statement, which will give it the agency and the knowledge which is there in the system together to find out an answer for a question or solve a problem. Right? That is where the direct replacement of talent is bound to happen. And whoever starts it first, OpenAI with ChatML has opened up functions, which is that given what if you expose the functions which are available in your system to OpenAI, when a person is having a chat with ChatGPT, if it realizes that they are asking a specific question which involves calling a particular function in your system, it will do that automatically for you, right? So it's like basically, so there are these very early frameworks. Microsoft has semantic kernel. I think LangChain is one of the very popular ones, right? So there are these things which are being used to build. These are frameworks for building agents, so to say, right? So, and there are agents like GPT Engineer, which write files, etc. There are certain functionalities which are available in it readily. So these are going to be direct replacements for talent. Using these frameworks or technologies, people are going to get replaced. It's sad. I don't want to say it any other way, right? It's just that it's not a question of if, it is a question of when.
Yeah, I think time horizons, because a lot has still to be built, right?
Right.
To make this a reality in context for industries, for companies at large scale, right? It directionally, that seems very plausible. Time horizon might be,
Correct. And it is almost like, this prompt engineering stuff that people put, which is that if one company comes up with the right prompt and the right combination of the sequence of things, the right orchestration of things,
and then replicating it is not very difficult.
everybody will replicate it.
Yeah, and we've seen that in
Like
history also. We've
Sorry?
seen that in history, in various technological innovations. We've seen that in, somebody was talking about this, I guess the prompt is another way. First of all, it was, let's say, the search box
Right.
is a prompt, which has now been stuck with us for 25 years, I guess. Then there was, I think, the scroll, correct? Information scroll or news feed or combination of those, right? Which is a combination of mobile plus a news feed
Correct. Right.
coming in. Before that, there were, just general icons in HTML and GUI. So you're saying this prompt part, which today is sort of everybody thinking about Chat GPT, correct? At least from the consumer side, right? We all think Chat GPT, right? A box where you ask a question and it throws an answer. It need not just be that way, right?
So ChatGPT is an interface level thing, right? It is as much as an iPhone app, right? As you can just historical equivalent is iPhone app. One person comes up with an iPhone app, everybody will come up with an iPhone app.
Correct.
It is not a mode. It's not a differentiator.
Right, just an earliest form of it is taken.
Yeah, it's a parity feature. It might help you with a first mover advantage, but that's about it. It's not going to be a mode.
Interesting.
This integration with ChatGPT, whatever you want to do it, right? See, the analogy I would give it is the search box is that if you're speaking with a person who doesn't understand your language or you don't understand their language, right? There might be certain common things that you both understand. Door, 15 rupees, right? So the way you speak in broken phrases with a person who doesn't understand your language, like you call him sir, door, close, right? So these are the things that you say. We've been talking to search engines that way, right? Now we are able to just generally have a conversation. That is not going to drastically.
We're looking for keywords today.
Right. That will there will be a delta improvement in terms of how systems will be able to help us, right? Not a exponential increase over what a search box can help you with.
Got it.
Because it's the same person on the other end who's doing that retrieval of information for you.
Got it. So a lot of this is on the, either the application or the consumption and the delta there, right? I want to go back a little bit to Akash and say, hey, on the data infrastructure stack, right? There has been Snowflake, there has been Databricks, there have been improvements on those, right? Are those good enough, ready enough for this, whatever is this next wave? That infrastructure and how they enable data to be handled, prepared, and presented to whoever is the consumer. In this case, models, training models, or agents, or anything else, right? Or what are challenges there on the infrastructure side that the last few years have been good, but the next few years you'll have to build new tool sets on top of these, or new ones will emerge. What do you see, or what do you sense is possible there, or is even required there, more importantly?
Yeah. First thing, I think because we already talked about the convergence, so maybe it won't just be the Databricks and Snowflakes of the world will be building this. The data stack or the data tools required, I think that's already changing. Someone like LangChain or someone like OpenAI to some extent is eating into.
The model guys will build the infrastructure, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean that is also
you understand the need better.
Yeah, that is one way to think about it. But I think another is that, okay, so for example, vector databases is one of the things that have exploded recently, but the reason for that is it basically, other than, theoretically or from the research paper point of view, there was never a need for anything like that, right? We were not using sort of text data the way we are now, and similarly, there'll be other pieces of info. Me personally, I'm most excited, or just in general, excited about the fact that there'll be new kinds of data which no one really has a clue how to work with, right? So I mean, we talked about like compute not being a problem. I think there was some part where sort of that happened. Like, even let's say it's not being compute intensive, but I think one thing that, so a lot of these Snowflake, Databricks data stack of the world is geared to working with tabular data, right? And billions of rows is huge, like there, or trillions of rows. Now compare that with text or images or video, right? That can blow up much, much faster. So even sort of handling us, and especially like right now, we are sort of dealing with text, which is still like a small part, right? Once we sort of start adding other sort of modalities, etc., that those kind of systems just don't exist. So that is for me the blankest of blank spaces, which vector is, like, databases is one part of it. Rest, I think, whatever problems exist for people in the data ecosystem, that will continue to exist. And I think that that stack around sort of data warehouse or databases or data lakes never really was able to seamlessly fit with the whole deep learning thing that was going on. But with LLMs, what has become easier is now you don't have to worry about running GPUs into your infrastructure or making sure sort of everything works sort of properly to run a deep learning model. You have a simpler interface, which is what also Satya pointed, like a lot of simpler interfaces available. So I think the old problems will remain there, like especially if you're working with tabular data, the place where they both fit together, the interface between the two systems, which is the old school sort of the whole data sort of infrastructure and these new LLMs, that's where opportunities will really lie, which is vector databases is one example. And for rest, I think, and that is not something necessarily that people who haven't worked with these kind of data systems know. So I think there will be an opportunity at that interface in particular. That is, I mean, one sort of pretty big space.
Interesting. So on the particular roles on the modern data stack that of people who build that, operate that, manage that, right? Data engineers, data scientists, similar, right? You see therefore there should be sort of an evolution of the roles of these tags, at least that we use. What a data engineer does, what an ML engineer does, what a data scientist does. I know they're already a little fuzzy, but will some of it become obsolete and it'll just go in a whole different direction? Again, freewheeling here.
Yeah, I think Satya can also add to it, but I'll take a first stab. So I think these roles have always been kind of fuzzy, but I think data scientist in general has been the fuzziest of the lot. But I think what prompt engineers today do is, I will say to some extent, a version of data scientist or data analyst from that old world. Because what they're trying to do is make sure that you have this model or sort of system, and you basically are trying to come up with a way to make sure that you get the best use out of it for your own data. But again, it's a very loose analogy. But I think ML engineers in particular, I think that engineering role, I think, will be the least susceptible to change, because there a lot of the challenges do remain same. Especially if you're trying to do things in-house, whether it's building a data layer or even training your own model. I think the infrastructure challenges or things like that will remain. I think upskilling will be required, a lot of it. If depending on how complex your tasks are. I think the place where there will be, I think, a bigger challenge for, I think, especially people who are we have been using the term talent, will be the more business facing roles, because now a lot of data scientists and analysts, they are at the intersection, where the pure business user does not have the ability to tweak the systems which are, which can sort of do their job or sort of make best use of the data, right? And there's been this whole sort of intent to make sure that the sort of the system and the ability to tweak is very close to the business user that is there. And with the whole LLM sort of revolution coming in, I think the interface not becoming sort of much easier, there is a chance that there'll be some roles at least which sit at the intersection of business and technology where we'll have a hard time, which was already happening, to be honest. It's kind of a continuation there. But I think on the more technical side, I think there'll be more challenges to solve, etc. On the business side, there will be some restructuring. Maybe, like, for example, a finance person will be more easily able to do sort of use their data. Earlier, they relied on two different teams.
Your cue.
Oh, I just realized
that.
Right. So here's
Sorry, I cut you off, Akash, but I couldn't resist.
right. So it's a top-down way of looking at this, right? Which is like, you want an agent which is going to replace your talent, right? Which means that you need grounding, so to say, or knowledge about your own processes, your own data in the organization, which becomes a information retrieval problem. Okay, this is the data infrastructure part of it. What will get added to the data infrastructure part of it? So the piece that will get added is, because if it is an information retrieval problem, originally we were having search and database queries as two things which helped in information retrieval, right? These two things will stay, with the addendum that because you want textual data, which used to be just basic search, now it is going to be vector search, right? And also other modes of data, right? Though vector is just a representation which will help you find text or videos or images or all the multimodal content that you want. Vector is a unification model for retrieving it. So vector databases will come in, right? Or hybrid vector / regular search engines will come in, and then there will be databases. These two will act as information retrieval systems. So only one part is going to get replaced not replaced, added to the infrastructure, if you will, right? Which was there earlier. The rest of the pieces stay the same, right? Now, on top of this, we are seeing companies which are coming in, which act in the metadata layer, in the governance layer, etc. Right? So those pieces combined with the information retrieval systems together will help companies to use these generative AI models to replace talent. Right? So that is how I'm looking at it. Now, that segues into what roles which will be available. Right? What roles will be available? I think I will take I agree with Akash that it's the roles which are in intersection of business and technology that are going to have a little bit of a threat, specifically data engineers, data scientists, or what have you, right? Those roles are going to get replaced. They actually do get replaced when SaaS apps or software gets in, that's one level of it, right? So it's like, if you just very broadly think about it, Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world, right? And now it is like software is going to eat software, which is like it just keeps on going. That cycle keeps on going, right? So it's like, who builds that software? Maybe software builds that software. So it's ultimately all of this is going to get eaten. The first line of threat is for people who try to translate data into insights, right? And that's a very broad term on purpose I've used, which is like, it is BI, it is data science, it is all of those things, right? Those are the layers which might get replaced first, right? Because doing that,
Yeah, it is strategy. It is strategy. It is, yeah. You can use many vague terms for it. Uh, Fair enough. No, very helpful. I'm going to take a pause. This has been amazing freewheeling, but Dhanush, I think there might be some questions from others that we have. Is there a list of questions?
Okay, is there any techniques or approach to improve the outcomes of the models? I mean, maybe that's something you want to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, quality of models, quality of output of models.
And how do you
Right.
benchmark these models when you want to implement your application? How do you shortlist? Because that's a larger question everyone is trying to figure out. But is there any tips and tricks? How you guys are shortlisting? It will be an interesting question to have.
So I think, so to start off, if we keep I mean, in some cases, let's say OpenAI does not satisfy your legal requirements or compliances or whatnot, or security. I mean, keeping all that aside, I think the first thing ideally anyone should do is sort of do a POC using one of those infrastructure sort of hosted models, because it's just a big hassle otherwise. It's not easy to even sort of host and sort of deploy and all that necessarily, especially if you don't have sort of prior experience. But generally there are benchmarks out there for a lot of these models, but I think there's a bit of art involved to it as well, because for different use cases, because a lot of those benchmarks are based out of research in terms of question answering, or a lot of tasks which were used for a long time for NLP research. And again, I think for most of those like leaderboards or benchmarks, you will have sort of the OpenAI and Anthropic and these on top. The open source models still lag, but still, I think if sort of security is and cost like are factors in that case, you may want to sort of use those benchmarks and try to pick a smaller model and try to see like for yourself, like there's some subjectivity in terms of evaluating the results, just working with it, see if sort of it satisfies your use case. There are sort of some frameworks, like OpenAI has a framework called eval, which again is not trivial to sort of work with, but again, you can use something like that. But I think to keep it simple, ideally you should start with somewhere where you don't have the worry of infrastructure, or there are some providers which also sort of let you test different models, and sort of start there, and then like work your way towards smaller or open source models based on those benchmarks. If you have a specific task, you can look that up. That's how at least I think about it.
So here's my take on it is it depends on the application that you want it for. If you're trying to do a SaaS app, you could split it up as information retrieval, which is unstructured data, some data summarizing it, or etc. Any model is good enough for that, right? Any model which does, there are these evaluations that you have readily available. You can see that, check, just type a few questions along with the information within context without using even a vector database, and check if the result is up to your satisfaction. And you could use that. So just to say that there are very few people who are using LLMs in production at the moment, right? LLM combined with something in production. That's something you should know. It's going to be beta for a long time for everyone, right? So the quality of output, when we say, if it is information retrieval, in terms of data querying, etc., you could start with OpenAI or one of those models, put a proxy layer, collect your data, and then if you want, you can fine tune a open source model. Right? There are companies which allow you to run even open source models as they provide the infrastructure for running these open source models easily and fine tuning them relatively easily rather than doing it yourself, so to say. Right? That is something you can do. So those are the two things we have tried so far. From all the people I know and all the network I have, so far I don't know many people who've done LLMs in production, which is that without a beta.
Why do you say, just a quick this thing on that, why do you say that it'll be in beta for a long time? You said that. Why do you think that's the case? What's holding this back?
Right. It is the quality, like, I think the question was asked about improving the quality of output, right?
This is saying the hallucinations, accuracy, is that a proxy for quality or anything else?
No, so I don't think accuracy is one. Accuracy can be gained by grounding it, right? Which is like you give the information in context as to what it has to answer about, and it will give an answer which is mostly okay, right? Otherwise, there is a chain of thoughts thing. There is like there is research to be done by trying to use AlphaGo model of Markov chain process tree in this, etc., and all of that. But that research is still to be made. But accuracy is okay. 95% accuracy, which is as much as a human can give you looking at data, right? So I don't think that is one thing is it'll stay in beta because nobody will want to stamp that this is accurate answer, or human is always in the loop, so to say. It cannot happen without a human in the loop for some time. That is why we would call it beta. We can take the beta label off when we say human is not needed in the loop. I'll give you an example, right? Jasper AI will give stuff for a marketer, right? But it need not be necessarily very useful for them as it is. They might need to work and rework on it. The human needs to prompt it so many times. That's when it becomes, usable. So so to say, that's why I'm putting the beta tag. It's a very generic, label. So.
And just following that, Akash and Satya, it would be great. What does your GenAI tech stack look like, and what are the models you are experimenting with? That'll be great to hear.
So we've experimented with Anthropic and OpenAI and MPT models. OpenAI is by far, the best for our use cases, which is we are trying to build a conversational UI layer, right? Where it's a interface stuff. So NL to configuration, or like, we want to use it in two ways. One is use this to decrease deployment times, which is configuring the system, etc. Right? And two is directly act as a co-pilot for a finance person in their organization. For both of these cases, we found OpenAI to be useful. There's a security aspect that Akash has touched upon. One way is Azure allows you to host secure boxes. Azure OpenAI gives a little more security than OpenAI by itself gives. Both are equivalent in terms of functionality. So, but you need to be a slightly bigger company to force Microsoft to give you those stuff. So I think it'll. All I can say is that everybody needs to wait a little more for things to be a little more democratized. Go ahead, Akash.
Yeah. So I guess pretty similar. So we use GPT-4 and 3. 4 is we used to use GPT-3 in the app until we got access to 4, I think, a couple of months back. Since then, we have been using 4 in production. But again, it has its limitations, particularly in terms of inference times, and like in terms of they have a cap limit, etc. So we also have sort of 3 in place as backup. We had also launched a free tool last week, coincidentally, which was on product end, which was built, which used GPT-3. Now, we also sort of the Azure thing, I think I'll also double down. I think it will be a smart move for most companies who are trying to sell to businesses to move to Azure as soon as they can. But again, it's not easy to do that. As for our stack, it's pretty straightforward as of now. We have tried sort of Anthropic. I've also tried a bunch of other sort of layers that are out there, kind of LangChain, Llama Index, a bunch of SaaS tools. But to be honest, we just did it all bare bones. We have sort of a pipeline in place, again, sort of basic pure Python and sort of a bunch of serverless functions in place. And we sort of, because we are not hosting anything, we just are able to make do with a typical cloud infrastructure. And we do a lot of and we have sort of vector database in place, but again, it's pretty basic right now in terms of the processing, etc. We do.
I'll just take over from what Akash did. I think we are using fairly similar technologies, which is like we tried LangChain. It is just more hype than it is. What we pick up from LangChain is just basically, LangChain is just a collection of prompts. And these days, it's almost like most research papers are one prompt, right? So it's a collection of these research paper prompts, so to say. So you can use that. For that, it is very useful looking at LangChain. But otherwise, all you need is just how you want your pipeline, how you want the output to be passed or looked at is in your hands. It's just a bunch of functions that you can write, right? So that way you do use. We've tried Pinecone, which is pretty good. But we have this security requirement, so we are using Quadrant as a vector database. So yeah, I mean, basically Blue Copa hosts inside the customer choice of cloud. So for that, we also host Quadrant inside that. It is relatively okay. There is some backup stuff that you need to take care in terms of operations. Otherwise, if you're okay doing a vector database which is hosted, it is better to use a vector database which is hosted. So personally, I'm a fan of don't do any undifferentiated heavy lifting. So don't bring operations onto your engineering team's head. So like as much as possible, like use the hosted ones.
I'm sorry about that interruption, but I'll quickly sum up some stack again. It's like we use OpenAI. We have an internal pipeline in place. What we have spent a lot of time on is, I think what Satya mentioned around grounding and sort of making sure our sort of answers are truthful and sort of they have sort of high quality, because our users do have a pretty high bar, some of them in terms of even sort of things like summaries, etc. So we have spent a lot of time making sure that the output is same in a way. So things like making sure prompts sort of are basically tuning prompts or around sort of validating the data that's being sort of received, and sort of making sure that the data that moves from one stage to another, that all that is sort of that makes sense. But again, all that happens with a typical sort of the existing cloud infrastructure that we have in place, and we haven't sort of relied on any sort of special tools as of now, because as Satya mentioned, they are not very evolved. Like tried them, but they are more of a overhead than help at this point.
One small point I wanted to add was we did have these. We were always prompting the GPT-4 API chat. I think it's the Chat GPT API. So we were trying to prompt it to give back JSON in which there were functions that we could call, etc. Right? And now that is kind of almost irrelevant in the sense that OpenAI does that if you just specify the functions in the functions section. So it's like it's evolving, like I said, right? All we can do is wait, and it'll evolve to a very decent extent. There's no point in hurrying into being. I don't know if you really get a first mover advantage in this.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. We're seeing it across the board, right? I think stability, quality, high value at the end of the day to the end user experience, right, is where the differentiation will lie. So just by being first, it's highly unlikely that, yeah, you can get somebody like OpenAI can get Chat GPT and get 100 million users. But apparently, even that, there were some tapering numbers over the last few
Yeah.
weeks,
Yeah.
what I was hearing. So, maybe there's a novelty aspect there that everybody wanted to try. Hey, let's see how this answers. Let's see what responses we get. But it's, is it ingrained into everybody's workflow? Probably not, and that needs a lot of work, right? And if that needs a lot of work for ChatGPT, OpenAI, that definitely needs a lot of work for everybody using. That makes a lot of sense.
So there is one aspect of giving it out early, which is that user familiarity. And see, I think user expectations are going to translate. Most people have tried GPT in our tech world and in the business world. So there is no resistance to trying and using it. They're enthusiastic is what I understood. So if it's just to meet that enthusiasm or to show that bar, for investors, etc., that you have to put out the OpenAI, the chat interface. But otherwise, to really help customers, I think there is still beta for some time. It's going to still.
Yeah, I think that barrier of, hey, how do you enable everybody to ask the right prompt, put the right prompt, ask the right question, make it easier, simpler, right? That is where, if friction is reduced, then the consistent usage as well as the mass usage
That
is most likely.
Yeah, and one other small aspect is we almost for our use cases we put the temperature to 0. And at least it gives predictable output almost all the time.
We don't need it to be creative, just need it to be reliable. Just one thing I'll add to that, especially because I think we have a different route compared to a lot of people building with these APIs and sort of models. I think a lot of B2B and enterprise, there's a lot of ways of working that are not changing anytime soon, at least not in the next couple of years. So embedding into the workflow, I think, will be important, especially for the B2B use case. So a lot of emphasis will be on UX. And even if you think models, you have to think about where exactly does it fit into the workflow. As like if you have to think beyond the chat interface or the search sort of interface.
Great insights. Dhanash, Ankita, any other exciting questions that Akash or Satya can answer, or we wrap with their predictions?
No, I'm good. Maybe forward with their predictions.
Awesome. Then
their observations.
Let's wrap with what you guys think. What are you most excited about? What are amazing things that you think we will see happen because of this? Like I said, I'm just saying 5 years, 10 years, but you can pick a timeline, just prognosticate. Would love to hear your predictions or your wish list, combination of those.
Akash, you want to go first?
Sure. I think in the short term, I'll just say short term, which maybe 5 years, a lot of hopefully there'll be more sort of skilled people being able to do their work better. Skilled as in knowledgeable people. I think there are a lot of constraints right now which are kind of redundant, be it in the business or creative sphere. Like you have to deal with a lot of overhead to get work done, even if you know how to do it. That's where a lot of kind of technical middlemen also come in. I think that part hopefully will get reduced a bit, and I know that is beating on my sort of past job a bit, but I think there's value to that. I think in addition, there will hopefully be things which we haven't even thought about. So that always sort of keeping my mind open for that. Another thing I'm generally really excited about, which I'm not sure right now how that will take place, is just for this to move out from the cybersphere to just meet with the physical world. I know a lot of this has been around LLMs and tech, but in general, AI has sort of been around in manufacturing and factory floors and all that a long time. Computer vision sort of developed a lot in those sort of areas as well. So I'm generally curious and intrigued to see how this affects. I mean, agents is one way to do it, but there may be sort of other ways to do it. How this basically permeates to the physical world. That is another thing generally I'm looking forward to.
Well, that's a very interesting, the second one in terms of the physical world and hardware and how AI can power that in various use cases, right? We're already seeing that in biology as well, biotech, right? Lots of exciting things there. Great point. Great point. Satya?
So in the near term, what excites me is the fact that we can make digital twins of whole companies, including departments, organizations, everything, right? It's almost that we might be able to make an autonomous company. So that's something, that's the vision that North Star that we'll operate with, right? That's around a 5 to 10 year time horizon, if you will, right? And beyond that, it's I know, I think technology is going to automate a lot of stuff, right? AI is going to automate our intelligence. So the human glue layer will not be there. So I'll just take the dark side of it, right? There might not be enough jobs, etc. The next generation people who are coming into work around 2030 would realistically find, very tough things. All the people will say that you always find a better thing to do. I don't know what that better thing this time is. So every time it is involved your brain, this time your brain is getting replaced. So I don't know what is that better thing that will come. So yeah, I am just looking forward to universal basic income, a post-commerce world, that sort of stuff. Right? So that's the 2040, 2050 horizon, if you will.
No, very cool. Very cool. Obviously, a lot of positivity, a lot of interesting stuff, but also something to ponder upon. I'm only, for the short term, happy that neither of you said that the VC job is at stake. Maybe it is, but amazing.
In finance, right? The way we think about it is finance people only trust humans, at least as of now, right? So I think people will trust VCs with their money. So
Maybe a little longer. Maybe we are
yeah.
safer for a little longer.
As a conduit for people who have money and people who need money, I think that will stay.
No, amazing way to end this. Thanks so much, both of you. Real freewheeling conversation. Learned a lot on so many aspects. We made guesses on a few things. Right, we understood where this is going. One of the overarching messages I'm taking away, and for the audience, is probably, hey, let's be patient, build right, get it right, focus on the use case. Right, the buzz is there, the hype is there, but there isn't necessarily a first mover advantage. Do what is most important for the end use case and the end user, right? Using all these tools, all right? And yeah, I think that's where the value lies. Super exciting conversation, guys, and super exciting what both of you are building, right? Akash, Loop Panel, Satya, Blue Copa, right? We're, of course, biased and insiders, but we're very excited to how you're going to leverage these technologies to add more value to these businesses, right? And look forward to more and more such conversations. Thank you so much, everyone. Signing off from Speciale Talks of this edition. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.